Holy moly, do we have a conversation for you today? And you know what? It's all going to be about Oracle. I hope you brought your Oracle pants because that's the conversation for today. Welcome to Cloud Talk Live. I'm so glad to be back. It's been a week. I was in New York City all week and I got home late last night and excited to be here with you today. We got to talk to some incredible customers up there, part of our advisory board, in our super engaging conversation. But as always, folks, I'd love for you to introduce yourself in the comments down below. Tell me who you are. Tell me where you are in the world. It really does matter. I just love getting to see all that stuff. Granted, LinkedIn tells me some stats about you, but not all that much information. So introduce yourselves. I'd love to get to know who is here today. And as always, you can reach us here at Cloud Talk Live at the email address of solve@rackspace.com. So shoot us a note. Tell us you got some feedback for us, ideas for a guest, a topic. We get something wrong, you can tell us all about it at that point. Fantastic. All right, this week's podcast that's out there right now, Smidith Nambiar, we had an engaging conversation about IoT. McAllen in San Antonio. IoT, and you want to check that out. Now, we've got a new one coming out later this week. I think it's later this week, maybe the first to next. But we did a bunch of research. I've been teasing that research, and we're releasing that here this week. And we've got a podcast where Josh Pruitt, Rackspace's Chief Product Officer, and I decompose all that information. So you're going to want to be around to check that out. You know, the best way to do that, of course, is to, I'm messing up with my buttons, is to subscribe to Cloud Talk. Make sure you don't miss anything. You can find Cloud Talk anywhere that the podcasts are found. You see a list of some of them just down below. So go ahead and subscribe. Hey, Jason is here from Atlanta, Georgia. I connected through Atlanta on my way home last night. Lovely city. All right, and we also have Gerardo. Glad that you are here. Well, I mentioned that today is Oracle Day, and I've got two amazing Oracle practitioners who are here to have a conversation with us today. And the first is Macon Medlin. He is an Oracle solution architect at Rackspace, solving the Oracles all day long. And then we also have Ed Shnekendorf. Now, Ed has been with Oracle for a good long time. His title on LinkedIn is software professional, but he's going to tell us more about what that actually means. So with that, why don't we go ahead and bring them up onto the stage? I'm so happy to have them here today. There we are. Macon, Ed, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Morning.
Good morning. All right, Ed, is it really software professional? Is that the day-to-day job? Let's get a little more into the exact job title that you have over there at Oracle.
Sure, Jeff. So my official title at Oracle is Distinguished Cloud Architect. I've been with Oracle for 10 years now. Started out, supporting some of Oracle's Fusion middleware products on premises, and for the last year have been supporting customers of all stripes who are implementing Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, OCI.
All right, distinguished architect. Yeah, you're doing yourself your LinkedIn could use a little attention. Brag about yourself a little more. That's quite the achievement. Now, Macon, let's get a little bit about your background. Of course, you are here at Rackspace, but take us back to those early days of Oracle and how'd you get into the space?
So yeah, just fairly recent to Rackspace. Been here about 2 years. However, prior to that, I was working with companies in the hosting, specializing in Oracle. I've been working with Oracle for over 20 years. Started out with the databases, moved into the applications from all the way back in the 10.7 SC days, if anyone remembers those, all the way up through 12.2. So I was an app DBA and have moved into being a solution architect, so I can help clients out now with developing their solutions and running Oracle.
Well, and you're starting to call it out well. When Ed and I were planning for having him on here as well, and I was saying, hey, we're going to talk about Oracle in the cloud, and Ed, your comment to me was,
what do you mean by Oracle, Jeff?
Well, what are our options? What do we mean? When we say Oracle, what could we mean?
Right. So, I think a lot of people, of course, traditionally think about Oracle in terms of Oracle database, and that's certainly a big part of what Oracle does. But again, let's not forget that Oracle is the largest application vendor out there. Applications both in the cloud and on premises. Think about things like e-business suite, PeopleSoft, but also business unit applications, whether it's in the utility space, financials, et cetera. And then, of course, lots and lots of technology components. One of the things that I work with customers the most on is Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, which is a premier hyperscaler out there, along with Azure, AWS, and GCP.
That's right. That's right. Now, we have Cheryl who is watching. She's up in New York. I was just in New York. I think I said that. But supporting Oracle EPM on-prem. So on-prem is, of course, one of those places where you can run some Oracle. In fact, it's the birthplace, I would even say, of where Oracle ran, because that's where all of our stuff ran before the clouds became the cloud. Now, Macon, one of the things you get to do as a solution architect is to help talk to customers about the different places that Oracle, the database and such can run, and maybe some of those pros and cons. Maybe step us through some of those locations.
Right. So, I mean, clients, and we're still seeing it a lot today, even with everyone talking about cloud and moving to cloud, there's a lot of clients that are still running on-prem, but want to get out of those data centers. That's a big expense. They want to move away. When you talk about cloud, there's really two things that you talk about: private cloud or public cloud. A private cloud is, for example, bringing it to a hosting provider such as us, and we set up a cloud solution for you where it's mimicked on-prem. For example, you have a lot more control over security and the servers and that sort of thing, but you're not having to manage the back-end infrastructure, so you save that cost. The other option is what we consider public cloud, and that's your AWS, Azure, GCP, and OCI, who we're going to talk about a little bit more today. Now, the benefits of a public cloud is cost. It's usually going to be cheaper than the private cloud. Just because it is a shared platform and you're taking advantage of that amount. The one downside is you don't have as much control. So if you have some real internal processes that are very strict, public cloud may be restrictive to you. So you would look at a public cloud option, or a private cloud option, sorry. The one real good benefit of a public cloud, in addition to the cost, is you have the ability to shut down. For example, if you're running EBS, PeopleSoft, you have some non-prod instances that are not used on the weekends, they're not used in the middle of the night for whatever reason. You have the ability to shut those down and save that cost on a monthly basis, because you're only billed for what you actually use by the minute. So if you are only using it 30 hours a month, you only pay for 30 hours a month. If you're using it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you're going to pay for that completely. But you have that option, whereas private cloud options, you really don't have as much flexibility when it comes to things like that. Now, one thing I always like to bring up, especially, is licensing, because that's something I get asked all the time for customers that are looking at cloud options. How is that going to affect my Oracle licensing? We've all been there.
Yeah,
don't want to have that.
Whenever Oracle's talked about,
right.
The second statement is, well, talk to me about licensing. What's the impact going to be?
Exactly. Now, when you talk about licensing, private cloud, that's the other benefit of it. You have a lot of control. If you have a complex licensing scenario, you have complete control over what you can scope, what it can be built, and that sort of thing. And it's no different than the licensing that you do on-prem today. When you move into the public clouds, it's a little bit trickier. Oracle has very specific rules, though, which is good. They've made it, there's a defined plan of what you can and can't do. For example, on AWS and Azure, if you, they consider 2 virtual processors, so 2 vCPUs, as one processor license. If you're using multi-threading. If you're not using multi-threading, 1 vCPU is equal to 1 processor license.
1 to 1.
If you're running on-prem today, you know that an Intel chip, for every core, you get two threads, and you can get 2 cores for 1 processor license by Oracle's 0.5 calculator. That's one benefit of OCI as a cloud provider for Oracle. With Oracle, they do OCPUs, not vCPUs. And OCPU is an actual CPU core. So whereas on AWS or Azure, you can get 2 vCPUs for 1 processor license, with OCI, you can get essentially 4 vCPUs for one processor license. So you get more horsepower for your licensing. And again, that's kind of equal to what a private cloud solution would be as well. In it, but it always is a consideration when you talk about it.
Yeah, and Macon, let me actually add on a couple things to that. So I think you're absolutely right in terms of some of the benefits of licensing and OCI. I would kind of call out a couple more things to consider. So when you come to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure to OCI for something like a database workload, there are 2 ways that you can license it. One is a subscription-based license. So if you're a net new customer, let's say you don't have any Oracle licenses on-prem, you can pay subscription-based licensing, and you don't need to have any kind of long-term licensing commit, right? You basically price it by the by the minute or the second in some cases. If you are a customer that does have licenses on-prem, like a lot of enterprise customers do, you can bring that what's called BYOL, or bring your own license, to OCI, which means that your on-premises licenses that you're using, let's say for Oracle Database, can actually come and they can fund not only Oracle Database running in that same format in OCI, but can actually fund a PaaS service, right? So, kind of an elevated service that gives you automatic provisioning, automated backups, restores, patching, scaling, right? It's going to defray those costs, and even defray the cost of something that you can't get on premises. For example, something like autonomous database, where if we have time, I can talk a little bit more about that. The other 2 things to consider when coming to OCI is that Oracle has a number of programs that make it really financially interesting for customers to come to OCI. One of them is something called Oracle Support Rewards. This allows you to basically apply some of your on-premises support spend to, or I'm sorry, defray your on-premises support spend when you bring workloads to the cloud. So let's say you're bringing your own licenses to the cloud, right? Depending on how much consumption you have in OCI, you can recoup up to 30% of that on-premises support spend by moving those workloads to the cloud. So it's a huge differentiator for Oracle customers that have a big license footprint. The last thing that I'd mention is that Oracle does have a program called Cloud Lift Services. It's an included service that will help customers with cloud migration. Now, I know Rackspace does a wonderful job of helping customers both run in the cloud and migrate as well, but this is something that can be done in conjunction with a managed service provider like Rackspace to basically help decrease the amount of effort customers have in migrating to OCI.
And one point to bring up.
I had something there.
So just talking about OCI and another big thing that I do like to bring up, because if we are complex customers, if you're running, let's say EBS, and you're manufacturing financials, you've got a huge instance and you're running RAC. For your clients that are running RAC and required, you need the RAC cluster, whether it be for high availability or to handle your user count. When you talk about public cloud providers, OCI is really the only one that can support a RAC configuration. And it's the only one that they support. So if you are a RAC customer and you need that ability, the other thing is Exadata. Awesome platform, super fast. The only place you're going to run it's on OCI or on-prem. So, if you're a very large client, very large database, you need that horsepower. OCI is definitely a place to look for to move it, onto to their Exadata.
Well, Macon, you're bringing up a really good point, and that is, and it seems like it's part of every conversation I've had this week with customers and with partners, and that is that there really is, even inside of organizations, a lot of times, no one size fits all, no one single playbook to be the one way to go about doing things. I mean, we talk about Oracle, and Ed punches me and he says, "Hey, what do you mean Oracle? It means so many different things." And we talk about, okay, well, it's good to run on-prem, or here's what it's like in a private cloud. Here's what it's like in one of the other hyperscaler clouds, or the hyperscaler cloud of OCI. But then now you're getting into trying to pick apart specific workloads. You mentioned whether RAC's involved, whether Exadata is involved, and that absolutely informs the direction that you're going to take, or that even the direction that you can actually take. I mean, Ed, how much of your day is, imagine digging into the specifics just to make sure that the right workloads are brought into the right places?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm definitely working with a lot of, really across the OCI spectrum, right? So not just at the database tier, but a big part of it is, taking a look at what a customer has on premises, what they're trying to accomplish, and figuring out how we can optimally provide for that in the cloud. Just to pile on to a couple of things that Macon just kind of brought up. There's really four main forms that we typically see customers running at least Oracle database and OCI. The first one is running, just kind of installing your database right on infrastructure as a service, right? It's self-install, self-run, self-manage. You certainly can take advantage of the OCI cost and performance benefits. And I know Macon kind of talked about how in OCI, each one of your what's called an OCPU and an Oracle CPU, that is a physical core with 2 hyperthreads. It is never oversubscribed, right? Unlike some of the other clouds, we make that guarantee. So we're not oversubscribing your network. We're not oversubscribing your CPUs. There's no sharing of any kind. So you get predictable performance in OCI just like you do on premises. The second form, though, and this is probably the more common one, is database cloud service on virtual machine. And so I mentioned this is a PaaS service. You can bring your own licenses and really run that for a fraction of the cost. You get automated provisioning, backup, restore, patching, scaling of both CPU and storage. You can automate all your lifecycle operations with SDKs, CLIs, Terraform, and like Macon said, we support RAC. This is the only cloud where you can actually run RAC because we provide for the layer 2 networking backplane that most public clouds don't support. For your bigger workloads, right, we do have a lot of customers that run Exadata on premises, right? So, now you're talking about if you're really supporting huge databases, right, up to 2.5 petabytes, right? Wow. Thousands of cores. That's the only place you can do that. You can't do that on virtual machines in OCI or frankly virtual machines anywhere else. So when you get to the point when you need to do millions, tens of millions of reads, IOPS up to 80,000 IOPS, millions of IOPS versus 80,000 or thousands of IOPS, right? You're talking about an Exadata platform. And the last plug I'd really like to make really is that a lot of our net new customers and even existing customers are starting to look at autonomous database. This has been out for a couple of years. What it essentially is, it is the Exadata hardware. So it's engineered hardware with full database automation and then lots of new machine learning capabilities. So supports analytic, online transaction processing, and JSON formats as well. And it's really a full self-driving database. So all the patches are done for you online with zero downtime, zero customer intervention. All the security updates are done for you with zero downtime across the entire stack, across the database, the OS, the firmware, right? And then you have auto scaling for compute, for storage, transparent backups, point-in-time recovery, and then lots of capabilities around self-tuning of indices, parallelism, plans, the whole 9 yards, right? So this is really a way to really reduce the database administrator overhead, remove some of those, kind of blocking and tackling things that DBAs do and focus a little bit more on database architecture. And that's something that, I think we invite all customers to really take a look at and try it out and see how it works for your workload.
And just going back on something you said, Ed, about the database as a service, just for everyone, when people hear that, they're thinking autonomous, I think, a lot of times when I talk to customers, but they are totally different. When we migrate a customer to OCI, whether they're running EBS, PeopleSoft, some custom app, and they're running an Oracle database, we will always set them up on the DB as a service. The reason is because the VM and everything that's configured for that VM is for a database. It is your best solution when running the database. It's not autonomous. Those are two totally different things. You still have complete control of the database, managing it, changing it. So it's, people do hear database as a service, and a lot of them do think autonomous, but they are two totally different things and two totally different technologies within those.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100%. One of the nice things about database as a service, as you mentioned, Macon, is that you do have those automated capabilities around provisioning, backup, restore, et cetera, right? But those are kind of on top of the underlying database platform that most customers are used to. So with database as a service, right, on VM, even with the rack configuration, you still have the ability to SSH into those, into those VMs. You have the ability to get command line access, to run scripts, the whole kind of things that the folks are used to. So I know a lot of customers are comfortable with that. With something like autonomous, that is, you don't have that access to the command line, right? So it is a little bit of a different paradigm shift. We do see it for, a lot of cloud native workloads, but again, we're seeing, it takes a little bit of time, but customers are starting to see the benefits of, changing their operating model a little bit more and not worrying about some of the things they might have done for years or decades on-prem. But completely agree with you. Probably, the most workloads that I do see are still running on DBCS on VM today.
Hey, there's an interesting question. We popped it up on the screen. Either one of you guys want to grab that one real quick? It talks about how latency at the time of flowing data to OCI from GCP or AWS or even from private cloud. How does latency fit into the picture here?
I mean, let me take a little bit of I can take a swag at it and then definitely get Macon's thoughts. So as far as latency of data flowing between clouds, you're really talking about between whether it's OCI and AWS or GCP or even at OCI and your on-premises data center. That latency is really going to be a kind of speed of light problem, right? So it really depends on where's your data center and which region are you with OCI. So one of the things that Oracle's trying to do with OCI strategy is to have a really broad regional footprint. We have 37 regions out there right now, about 10 more that are in the pipeline for the rest of the year. And so the question of latency is really dependent on where you're moving data in between, right? Like if you're set up in, let's say, OCI East, which is in Ashburn, Virginia, and let's say you're in AWS East, well, that latency is going to be pretty short. And if your data happens to be in a data center, let's say in let's say Des Moines, Iowa, and it's trying to come into our Phoenix region, for example, then there's going to be a little bit more latency.
You might feel that one a little bit more.
Yeah. Now, there's a couple things to keep in mind. You can definitely set up private interconnects, MPLS type of connections. Oracle has a technology called Fast Connect, very similar to Direct Connect in AWS or ExpressRoute in Azure. If you're familiar with those, we have a rich partner network, whether it's the Megaports or the Equinixes or the Packet Fabrics. And one thing I will call out, your question mentioned GCP and AWS. One thing to know is that Oracle has a partnership with Microsoft, and there are 10 regions in the world now where we have an Azure interconnect. So these are places where OCI is co-located with an Azure region. It's in places like San Jose, I think in Ashburn for sure. We're co-located in Frankfurt, in Tokyo. So there's 10 regions across the world, and we have a high throughput private interconnect between the two clouds where you can achieve latencies of under 2 milliseconds. So that actually opens up the ability to, if you even want to split your workload, which typically you wouldn't recommend somebody do. You wouldn't typically say, have a database in one cloud and an application tier in another. With those type of latencies, for a lot of applications, we're seeing customers have, for example, database running in Oracle, app tier running in Microsoft, or vice versa. So.
Well, there are a lot of other questions coming in about it, but unfortunately, we're getting to the end of our discussion point here. We talk about SLAs, RPOs, RTOs, and all of that gets into, I think, where you started with, and that is understanding the requirements and engineering the right solution in the right regions to be able to meet whatever the business requirements are. Obviously, this is a hot topic. We've got a lot of questions here. Would love to dig in a little bit deeper. So we are going to move on now into the next segment. But folks, keep your questions coming. It'll help us kind of influence the next time we get Ed and Macon back on the program. Obviously, a couple of experts been working in the technology for an incredible amount of time. So thank you so much for being here today. Really do appreciate it, and getting some compliments in from the folks as well. So thank you for being a part of the program here today, Ed and Macon. And guys, as you know, this is our round 2. I blue screened last time we tried to do this. First time ever. But I'm glad we made it through the interview today without old Windows having a bad problem.
Great. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, gentlemen. Amazing conversation. Thanks so much for that. Well, everybody, again, keep your questions coming as far as what you want to hear from these guys in the future. Oracle, OCI, amazing technology, continues to grow. I love the partnership with Microsoft. I love how they're continuing to build out their region. So check that out. Folks, I want to push the right buttons over here. There we go. You can always find the audio for these programs in the Cloud Talk audio stream. So just you can go find information out about it over at rackspace.com/solve, or just subscribe to Cloud Talk. You will get all the information that you ever wanted to know. And what you won't get are sales. There's no sales on that website, folks. It's all about just giving away information. All right, with that, it's time to move on to This Week in Cloud, which, of course, is us having a conversation around what has changed this week in cloud-based technologies. So let's take a look at that. So here's an interesting article, and it has to come from our friends as far as understanding spend. So the challenges of optimizing your cloud spend in 2022, guys. There's no one. This is the theme for me for this week. There is no one trick pony for solving any of the cloud-based problems. Every company is unique. Every company has a different path and different business metrics and goals that they're trying to meet. Now, there are patterns we can adopt. One of those patterns should be establishing a strong FinOps practice. That's what this article really gets into speaking about. Now, FinOps, as a point of clarification, isn't how do I just lower my cloud spend, but it's how do I ensure that every dollar spent, not just in the cloud, but in technology, creates meaningful business value that my company does just that, values. All right, so establish yourself a good FinOps team. Also in the news, Google Cloud shows up. So they've got a new offering here that they've talked about this week, and that is cybersecurity. It has to do with cybersecurity. Of course, it's at the top of every organization's priority list. At least it should be. Now, they have a new offering called Google. They announced today at the Google Cloud Security Summit. They revealed plans for the Security Operations Center, or SOC, of the future. Now, Google Cloud offers Chronicle, which is a service that enables customers to privately retain, analyze, search large amounts of security-based data. And now they're adding new services and capabilities on top of that. Automation, machine learning, artificial intelligence. It's the only way to combat the bad guys. So check that out. Really cool innovations from over at Google. Now, also in the news, actually not news, speaking of clouds, let's go talk about the new releases from the cloud providers. We'll start with AWS. And that starts with AWS App Mesh now supports IPv6, which is awesome because App Mesh is used by a ton of serverless-based applications, and now they're able to support not just IPv4 but now IPv6. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I applaud these providers for not just throwing services at the walls, but throwing services out there and continuing to upgrade and mature them, and then sometimes even building on top of them. I think I just sped right through the Azure. There it is. All right, Azure's update. Here we go. Public preview. Container storage interface is now has an extensible API for AKS. So this is, again, API. We're thinking application programming interface. This is how we add more automation and more scripts to the world of our cloud management. You know, those days of hands-on keyboards, flipping switches, making things, logging into servers, not so much anymore. It's all about how do I create a series of code-defined sets of infrastructure that's able to meet the business requirements of my organization. And then how do I also put my AI ops in play to be able to manage the stuff as well? So in preview, some new releases from Azure on helping with the storage aspect of containers. Now, over at Google Cloud, as if GCP didn't get enough of a shine mentioned earlier, but they have updated version of their ODBC and JDBC drivers for BigQuery. Now it has a ton of new enhancements. So check that out. And what's important about this is the fact that BigQuery, this monster, and we just had a big conversation about Oracle, but BigQuery database, obviously, incredible technology. A public case study for Rackspace. Our data is over running inside of there, how we manage some of our customer satisfaction scores and such. But they've added some new ways for existing applications to connect in real time through ODBC or JDBC to either fetch and or retrieve data out of there. Cool. All right. That's what's new with the cloud releases. Now, I've already mentioned I don't sell anything here except maybe give away knowledge, but also encourage you maybe come be a racker. Now, I'm going to bring a job up, the Rackspace job of the day as we know it. And I'm also going to be transparent with you and tell you that it's a rerun of last Thursday's job. Now, I'm bringing it up because we really need to fill this job because software observability is huge these days. And because, when we were running on VMs, we could put some monitoring tools in place and have a pretty good idea what's going on. But, people like App Dynamics, you've seen their title at the bottom part of my screen on different panels, because they're a sponsor here at Rackspace. But software observability is exploding, especially for those serverless cloud native applications where you need to have a way to monitor from the end user's hands-on keyboard all the way back to the backend database and all points in between. Now at Rackspace, we're looking for a leader for software observability. You can see it all there. If I'm going to bring up, if you go over to rackspace.com/jobs, you'll be able to search on software observability and be able to apply for that job. I would love to think you come and work with me here at Rackspace. One last reminder, the audio for this can be found in the Cloud Talk podcast. Find all the information you need over at our thought leadership program called rackspace.com/solve. Of course, just subscribe to the podcast. I've already mentioned App Dynamics, but let's bring them up and say thank you for their sponsorship of everything that we do here at the Solve program. We are doing a ton with them. They're an amazing organization, and we are helping here at Rackspace unlock true observability for so many of our customers through their tooling. So thank you so much for that. And guys, that brings us to the end of our program here today. I want to give you a little bit of a window into the future. Guys, we have an amazing program coming up for the summer, and we're calling it the Summer Road Trip Series. You're going to see some ads with me on LinkedIn talking about it, but we're going to go to almost every region on the globe where Rackspace has an office, all the way through EMEA, APJ, some places in the US, South America, Mexico. It's going to be really cool. But we're going to talk to cloud practitioners in each of those areas and find out what's going on in cloud transformation there. So watch for the Rackspace Cloud Talk Live Summer Road Trip Series coming up. Guys, it's been a great time with you today. Thank you for being with us here at Cloud Talk Live, and we'll see you next week.